we're here right now with Anton Pulvirenti, and we're at his studio. How are you?
Oh, good, thank you, Eunice.
So, is there anything you're working on right now?
Well, I've just finished this picture behind that you can see. This picture took me 3 days to do, so about 20 hours of work.
Did you take art out of your own passion, or was there an artistic side in your family that influenced you?
Both. Both. My parents met at art school in the early 1960s in Brisbane. In those days, when you studied, they were doing commercial art, so in those days you went to art school and studied all your lettering, and you did drawing and a bit of art history, and so art was in my family, and particularly graphic art. So my father would come home from work and there'd be lots of signs around the house, like stickers and stop signs and the logo for banks and things like that. So I became attuned to colour and design at a very early age for that reason.
So David Paulson, he's a master draftsman.
He is.
And an illustrator.
Yes.
You spent some time with him in Brisbane?
I did. I grew up in Brisbane, and when I left high school, or actually at the end of high school, I began drawing classes with him. About 3 days a week. And he introduced us to the fundamentals of drawing. So that involved drawing from the model about 3 times a week. So observational drawing from the model. So he was a very strong influence on me from a very early age, and his style involved putting the very essential basics of the figure down very quickly. And here I am 20 years later, and I'm still using all of those skills every day. So I like to trace it all back to him. He's the one that actually fired me on in the beginning and said, look, it's possible for you to become an artist if you want to. So the ball's in your court. So I'm still doing it 20 years later, so I'm very happy about it.
As an artist, your inspiration was built on your grandfather's internment in the Second World War.
Yes.
And it gradually deviated from that as you matured. So can you describe the evolution of your artwork? Yes,
well, as a child, well, as a lot of young boys seem to have an interest in that sort of war, sort of imagery. A lot of them will draw like castles, or it's just something about boys. As I got a little bit older, I'm talking maybe 14, 15, I began to realise I have Italian ancestry, and I began to think about that. And talking to my family about that, I realised that my grandfather had been interned as an enemy alien during the Second World War, prison camp in the south and of Australia. So much later on, after my studies with David, I did an undergraduate degree in Canberra, the ANU, and I did a body of work based on that experience of his. That involved a lot of portraits, family portraits, and thinking about his time in the camp and what that means in the present day for me. I've extended upon all of that work by doing a PhD in that area, so I've done a lot of study on not only his time in camp as revealed in a file in the National Archives, but looking at contemporary theorists that deal with the camp in their theory and what that means for contemporary society.
So how do you describe the creative process behind your artwork?
Oh, that's a good question. The creative process involves, for me, being very intimate with a piece of work right from the very beginning, and working with what happens. So you'll make a mark, and then you have that mark, and then you make another mark, and then one follows on from the next. And it's a very intimate sort of process, and it happens within that work, and it comes as a result of your physical interaction with that work. So it's a very physical process, and it just gradually develops by itself. And it's good to let it dictate the way it wants to go, rather than you saying, well, I've got an idea and I will illustrate that idea. So from that point of view, I don't see myself as an illustrator. I do illustrative work, but that's initially for commercial clients. So that's a very different way of thinking. But when I'm doing my own work, it's very intimate, and the work comes out of itself. It suggests, it tells me what to do. I'm not the boss.
Is there a specific mood or an environment where you have to be in order to create something?
Well, something quiet usually, though working in public, that's a little different. Working in public, you get very easily used to the noise. It can be quite loud. Then you've got the public interrupting all the time. So, but still, it's possible to work. It's actually, I've discovered it's possible to work in a very loud space. You can develop a quietness within the loudness of the public space. Though in here, it's very quiet, so it's a lot easier to get to that point. But having worked on the street, it's been easy for me to develop that sense of quietness, which seems to be necessary.
Does an emotional attachment to your artwork make it harder for you to sell it?
No, I'm actually quite glad to sell it because I've worked through that emotional attachment as I've made the work. So, I will get attached to it, and then I'm finished with it, and then sometimes I'm glad to be rid of it. It's like, I've got it out of myself. Making art, for me, is a continual process of getting something out. Something that's inside of you out. And once you do that, you feel a lot better. And you're glad you've got it out. And, you can do it again.
Yeah.
If it's not quite resolved. But the work will tell you when it's resolved. Or the process, when you start working on something that you may have done a number of times, like, for instance, a series of portraits, it will eventually get to a point where you don't feel involved anymore, and then you know that it's...
When and how did you start exhibiting internationally?
Well, I did a one-year sojourn in Korea as an English teacher, and I had a few exhibitions over there, a couple of exhibitions. So I would teach during the days and then make work on top of my apartment at night. And I eventually built up, with a friend, we actually built up a number of works and had an exhibition in Daegu in South Korea. That was one instance. I did show a couple of works in Italy after that. I went to Italy after Korea and studied with a master of Sicilian folk painting. My grandparents came from Sicily. Actually, my great-grandfather came here 100 years ago this week. So I went back there in 2004 to see where they'd come from and ended up meeting this fellow who was a great painter, and stayed with him for 6 months and had a little exhibition over there with a group of local artists, as well as doing a lot of portraits on the street, that sort of thing. After that, the next time I went overseas was to the Middle East, to Qatar, and I did a large piece in public for a marine festival there. So that went for 10 days. Other than that, I've been to New Zealand on another job for another client, and I've been to Italy again this year to participate in a very traditional chalk drawing contest in a little town called Draughtsman in the north of Italy. So that's the example of what I've done.
Is there a particular theme of artwork that you enjoy most?
I'm definitely drawn to the classical tradition of Western art. I guess because it's in my culture, and I've grown up sort of with the classical idea of art, which I inherited from David in those early drawing classes and in my studies since. So it's definitely the classical background. That's where I'm coming from. So that holds the most inspiration for me.
Is there a particular piece of artwork that's closer to your heart than the rest?
That I've made myself? Yeah. There is a portrait of my grandparents, which I made about 10 years ago, which I still hold very dear to me. I don't think I'll ever sell that one. Yeah. Or let it go. That's one. Yeah, I'd say there's a portrait of them, and that was made around the time that they died, so there's a lot of personal significance for me. And there's other paintings made from that time, which are on friends' walls, which they've got it, so I can still go and visit the work.
Previously, you changed the direction of your artwork from painting, which you call a heavy medium, to drawing.
Yes. Painting is very heavy in the way that there's a lot of labour involved before you get to the actual work itself. and then once the work is made, it's not light anymore. It needs to be stretched onto a stretcher, and also the way paint is applied is not as intuitive as with drawing. It's not as easy. There's a lot more steps involved to get it finished. So for that reason, I decided to simplify my practice and focus more on drawing. But also, there's a more ephemeral nature to drawing, which seemed to suit some of the memory drawing that I was doing in the PhD. So the drawings where I was remembering my grandfather's interment. Memories are very fleeting, and I found that drawing was more suitable to that sort of approach.
And has your direction changed since?
Since doing that, or since doing those works?
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I've actually come to the end of that. I no longer intend to make work involving my daughter or my family in that sort of way. Just recently I've been going out and sitting down with a sketchbook and directly observing events, usually public events. For instance, I went out to a camping trip a number of weeks ago, around New Year, and I did a number of drawings of that experience, and I was documenting the building of the mud brick house, and some of the conversations that were going on over the campfire, and that sort of thing. So I've wanted to return to this world and very direct observation, and contemporary society, very direct observations of what's going on, of things that interest me. So, there has been a significant change recently.
While in Sicily, you learned the traditional style of cone,
Yes.
silk painting.
Yes.
Where else would you like to travel to learn another culture's techniques?
I haven't really thought about that. Had I stayed in Korea, there would have been avenues there to study calligraphy and also a very different approach to making art. So the way I understand it, in Western art there's a separation between the artist and the subject, but in Korea, or perhaps in Asia more generally, there is not that same way. The artist is the work. So there's a very different philosophy operating there, which I'm very curious about.
But if you weren't an artist, what do you think you would be?
Oh, gee. I could be a teacher, perhaps.
Of English?
Yeah, that was a very enjoyable job. Or, with younger kids, like primary school age kids, that would be quite good. I don't see myself as a salesman, really. This drawing was inspired by a series of nightmares I had as a child regarding the war. And this is actually my school that I went to as a kid. And I had this dream about the school being invaded, and the whole thing was a pile of rubble. It was quite a scary dream for a 10-year-old to have. And I guess the background to that is that was during the Cold War, and there are a number of, you don't remember the 80s, but there are a number of emergencies, international sort of incidents where we almost got to that point of nuclear sort of conflict, and it was really awful to hear it on the news and think about it. Thankfully I've stopped having those dreams. But that's where this drawing has come out. So it's working in a way that uses these mythological figures. So we've got the animals, again talking about that confused space of law in the camp. When somebody enters an internment camp, they basically lose their humanity, and from what I've seen out there, they lose their dignity as well, and the way they're treated by staff, and they're treated as sort of objects. They're not even referred to by their names. They're referred to as Alpha and Juliet, and the aeroplane call signs, that's how they refer to them. So they're sort of treated as these almost like commodities, because it's a prison corporation, and that's very dehumanising to someone. And so I began, once I realised what was going on in these camps, I combined the human, because they're still human beings, but they feel like animals. So that's the basic idea behind these figures. When I started this drawing, I started here. I had no idea what I was doing until I sort of got up here, and then, then there was a building. I thought, hang on, that's like that building that from my dream, that was up the road when I was a kid. So it was a very intuitive process. This fellow was an internee in a German camp here in Liverpool during the First World War. So the Australian government interned thousands of Germans. And he's dressed up as a figure from a German opera. So they had to entertain themselves in that camp. So I did a couple of paintings of these opera singers. People inside the camp are sort of stuck between having the rights normally accorded to the law, but then not having them at all inside the camp. So they inhabit a grey space of law and of human rights. So they become the subjects of whatever problem the country is experiencing at that point in time. So in these works, I saw the confusion between the male and female as being very emblematic of that situation that an internee would find themselves in. So not only was the internee inside the camp, he was also representing, just through his very existence, the very nature of the camp itself.
Can you tell us about your work with the refugees?
Oh, yes. Well, I was invited by a really, really good friend of mine, who's an academic out at Sydney Uni, to go into Villawood Detention Centre. He and a friend, another colleague of his, decided to do a project called the Refugee Art Project, where they would go in and make work with the refugees and give them art lessons as a means for sort of like an art therapy approach, just make their time in there a little more productive and establish some links with the Australian community, because frequently they go in to these places and when they come out they're isolated from the broader Australian community. So we want to bridge that sort of gap. So we've had a number of exhibitions on those themes. The first exhibition we had was at the Murray Gallery here in Sydney, called Fear and Hope. And then we had another one called Building Bridges recently at UTS Gallery, in that foyer gallery down there. And so we had a number of works that were made by, in the Fear and Hope exhibition, we had a number of works that were made, 250 works that were made inside Villawood Detention Centre that they would make for us, and we'd talk them out, and also we'd go in there on the weekends and just do work with them. Mainly because of my interest in the camp, because of my grandfather's experiences. So, I went in to see what the camp was like, and ended up coming up with a whole lot of friends and a much richer idea of life.
Are there any upcoming events you're going to be a part of this year?
There will be a chalk drawing festival later this year in Sydney, so I'll be taking part in that. I would like to have an exhibition in August, so that's 2 events I'll be doing this year. So, yeah. Anything else? I haven't really planned yet, so it'll just be the work that I'm doing in public and finishing off the work for my study. So that's those 2 projects.
How do you prepare for these events?
Again, there'll be a theme. So I will set about doing some drawings around that theme, and then do a number of them, eventually progress to a drawing that has some sort of substance behind it, and then use that to work from. And then when I work on the large scale, things naturally tend to change, again, because of the larger scale. It's different. You think differently when you're working big on the ground when you're just drawing like this. So again, it's a physical thing, but the action of the hand is directly connected to sort of how you're thinking. So if you're drawing like this, the thinking is going to be very difficult to the more sort of expansive gestures of street drawing.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Eunice. It was a pleasure.
You can check out some of Anton's work in his website. That's www.antonpulvirenti.com.